Thank you for joining us for the Art of Reopening for Tennessee Arts and Culture Organizations. This is the 6th webinar in the Persist and Prosper series, hosted by the Arts and Business Council of Greater Nashville and sponsored by the Tennessee Arts Commission. My name is Jonathan Harwell-Dye. I'm the program manager at the Arts and Business Council, and we're a nonprofit art service organization that cultivates the creative community by offering education, resources, and opportunities that connect artists, arts organizations, and businesses. And you can learn more about us and our programs on our website, abcnashville.org. I'll throw that link in the chat in just a moment. This series would not be possible without the support of the Tennessee Arts Commission. So it's my pleasure to welcome Tennessee Arts Commission Executive Director Ann Pope to get us started. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan, can everybody hear me? How's everybody doing out there? I just wanted, first of all, to thank the Arts and Business Council. You've done a great job hosting this 6th in a series of webinars. So thank you to Jonathan and to Jill for being a great partner and putting this on. It's been really an honor to work with you. I want to also thank the panelists, Marcellus, David, LaTonnsya, and Stephanie. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a panelist. We're very excited, and I hope this is going to be beneficial. The intent of this series, as many of you know who've been a part of these before, was to provide some assistance throughout this pandemic. You know, things seems to change every day, and I think our feeling was, rather than long sessions, these quick sessions in and out, that we could get together and provide technical assistance, have panelists who are really on the ground and are closest to what's happening. We've got a lot of crackerjack panelists that we've had throughout the series, and today is no different. We hope these topics have been of interest and have helped. This series is wrapping up, but we don't think that this is by any means the end. We hope to have some webinars in the future on issues that will be relevant as things start to open or continue to open up in this new normal, I guess. I'm not sure if we're even to the new normal yet, but things are happening quickly. We want to continue to look for ways to support you out in the field, and we greatly appreciate you. As Tennessee opens up in this ever-changing environment and we get back to in-person, we hope that while congregating together will bring opportunities, we know they'll also bring some challenges. And so we hope today will help both with the opportunities and the challenges of as we come back together in person. And so I think that we know that the arts means business, and as the arts field open up, we know that the arts are going to be important in the recovery in your communities and across the state. So with that, I'd like to say welcome to everyone that's here, and thank you for being a part of the arts and for really hanging in and these unprecedented times. We so appreciate what you do, and let's continue to move the arts forward in this state. So thank you and welcome to everybody.
Thank you, Ann. And it has been our honor as well to be a part of this series, and I hope everyone has found it incredibly useful. As a reminder, we will have some time at the end of the session for Q&A. So if you have a question, you feel free to put it in the chat. I noticed that a lot of people are putting their names, their organizations, where they're from. I encourage everyone to do that. Feel free to get to know each other and get a sense of who's in the room. It's hard to see who's sitting beside you virtually when we're doing these sessions. But right now, let's welcome our panelists. And I'll begin by asking each panelist to introduce themselves, their organizations, and to sort of quickly share a timeline about when their venue closed, when they reopened, if they had any hiccups along the way. And we'll begin with Stephanie Silverman with the Belcourt Theater. Stephanie.
Hi, thank you, Jonathan. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here with an understanding group of colleagues. I know we're all feeling these changes together. I am the executive director of the Belcourt Theater in Nashville, Tennessee. We are a nonprofit film center. We have 3 screens and a classroom and are in Hillsborough Village, so quite close to Vanderbilt and the medical center. We are open actually, but just quite recently, April 23rd, we reopened. We closed originally on March 16th, 2020. We ran a drive-in through part of the summer, which was a lot of fun. It was quite hard on our staff, but it was much appreciated by our audiences. And we tried for a hot second to open in November, which did not really go very well. And we closed up shop again quite quickly because, of course, it was exactly at the moment that numbers really started skyrocketing in Tennessee. Thank you, Daniel. We are glad to be reopened since April 23rd. Right now, we're at a very low capacity. We're really at less than 20% in both of our large theaters, and we're keeping our small theater closed for now. But we are now revisiting capacity, trying to figure out what the next step is. And frankly, what we do about masking is anybody's guess right now, but we're thinking through it.
Thank you, Stephanie. And Marcellus, Harper, will you join us and tell us a little bit about you, your organization, and your timeline?
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. I'm Marcellus Harper, founding executive director of Collage Dance Collective in Memphis, Tennessee. We are a professional ballet company and conservatory. So we have 2 core programs. The first is our professional company, which performs locally and nationally and internationally. And also our conservatory, our training arm. We're retraining currently about 250 kids at our location in Memphis and Binghamton. And pre-pandemic, another 250 kids through our signature outreach program, Turning Point. We have been, well, the theme for us this year, really, the ongoing theme has really been turning poison into medicine. So unfortunately for us, when the pandemic hit, we were in the middle of a pretty ambitious, comprehensive capital campaign to build a new center, a center that was going to be pretty monumental and something that didn't really exist in many other parts of the country. So it was ambitious to begin with, without a pandemic. And so when the pandemic, presented itself, we obviously, there were lots of challenges that came with that. So again, unfortunately for us, we were in the middle of a pandemic, but fortunately for us, we were in the middle of a pandemic, which means that we were able to really kind of pivot and make some changes in the midst of our design and construction and implementation of the space to really make the space safer for our community. So we were able to add RTU ionizers in the HVAC system before construction began on that, which is a technology that kills viruses and pathogens in the air. We were able to really upgrade the HVAC system so that the air filtration was very sophisticated. We were able to make all of the restrooms touchless. We were able to choose a furniture package that had materials and fabrics that allowed us to disinfect with a hospital grade disinfectant, and really think about, how the space was laid out to ensure that we could social distance adequately. Of course, there were some other just great things, like the space being 10 times the size of our current space. So it really helped us expand our footprint. And so we were, as I said, we really were able to turn that poison into medicine and really, capitalize on some of the timing of the pandemic to make that happen. We originally closed in March in 2020, but have been open. Both the company and the school have been back in person since September, October. So we've been hosting in-person classes and in-person rehearsals for a long time. what we immediately thought, I immediately made the decision back in the spring that we were going to do a fully digital season for our professional company, that I couldn't really, I couldn't deal with the, like, let's wait and see what's going to happen, and let's keep pushing the ball down the court until we got to some, certain magical tripwire or benchmark. I just couldn't plan that way. So we decided that regardless of whether we're back in person or not, regardless of whether the world opens, our season was going to be fully digital. And so that was benefited us because we were able to really think about the season in a very creative and we were able to be very proactive. And so we partnered with WREG, which is our local CBS affiliate, and we're able to get our normally live performances, we were able to air those on WREG. And so it really allowed us to dramatically expand our audience and our exposure. We had over 150,000 people that saw the professional company this season, which are our biggest audience numbers to date. So again, that theme of turning poison into medicine. And then the school has been back since October. We've been we've had a complete hybrid model. So we've had students that have been in person, but we've also provided virtual classes for kids who cannot, whose families weren't comfortable bringing their kids back, but also to allow when families or when certain tripwires happen, that families had virtual programming. So if they potentially were exposed, or if there was someone in the family that wasn't feeling well, if they were going to travel, that they would isolate and take virtual classes without coming into the studio. So that's really allowed us to the best of our ability, provide training that has been uninterrupted.
Thank you so much, Marcellus. David Butler, will you share a little bit about you and your organization and your timeline?
Sure, thanks. Appreciate being here. I speak with the recognition that I'm talking to 70 people who could teach a masterclass in disaster response and resilience and flexibility and perseverance. So I think our experience is much like yours, and I appreciate this chance to hear your about other organizations' experience in kind of a detailed way. The other caveat is that and I can't speak for all visual arts organizations, but mine has compared to what I'm so inspired when I hear you talk, Marcellus, about your experience, and when I hear from other colleagues at performing arts organizations. It has been so horrific and so difficult. It has not been that bad for my art museum, at least. I think it's been we've come out fine. It hasn't been wonderful every day, but compared to because of the nature of our business model, when our doors are shut, our work goes on. We're still collecting, we're still researching, we're still doing a lot of things that we always do. We miss that in-person public component. But I make these remarks with the cognizance that what we went through was so much easier than what so many of you who are listening and so many people on the panel went through. So my hat is off to you, and I'm humbled and inspired to hear what my colleagues in Tennessee and elsewhere have been able to overcome this year. I would also add that maybe you all had in your as part of your education had training in what to do in a worldwide pandemic. I missed that class, and I feel like I know what to do now. We closed down. Well, we'll never forget this date, March 17th. I think we'll always remember. We went from, I think that was a Tuesday. That's when we would have opened after our Monday, usual Monday closing. Thursday, we were talking, gosh, should we close? You think this is bad enough? This is really serious. By Sunday, I wanted to scream at everyone in the museum, go home. Go home and lock the door. It happened that quickly. And even though we were all working in the dark, we kind of knew what to do. And I think it says a lot about our field and about our disciplines that that we tended to do the right thing without having to think about it too much. Yeah, we didn't announce anything, but I think the world knew we were about to shut down because the place was crowded, was packed. We were able to open July 1st with limited hours, with a reservation system to control numbers, lots of plexi shielding, a one-way traffic pattern. So people came in one door and left via another one. A mask requirement, of course, very visible sanitation procedures, the sanitation theater that we all know well. And all that has gone extremely well. It's been very smooth. We've been very fortunate. We've been able to operate more or less normally, except for a few months last spring. And I feel very fortunate that way. I think our frontline staff and volunteers, the people that really had direct contact with the public, felt protected. I think visitors felt protected. I noticed a real, I think there was a sense of intentionality about visitors. They really wanted to be there. They were happy to be there. I think they appreciated that experience in a way they might not have had before. We were getting pretty twitchy last December as the numbers were looking worse and worse. And I'd look in the New York Times, and Knoxville, Tennessee was usually listed as the worst place in the country. I think, forget that was December or January. And one of my volunteers said, please don't shut down. This is the only social outlet that I have. They felt that safe and that protected. That made me feel really good. In fact, we didn't have to close even when things were pretty bad out there. I was feeling really great about all of this. We had this conversation before y'all joined in. I as I was putting these remarks together, think, wow, we really got this, and we really know what we're doing. And then the CDC pulled the rug out from under us on Thursday, so we're kind of scrambling right now to figure out the best response to that. But for now, we're not changing anything right now, and I think that seems to work for our frontline staff and for our visitors. There's been no pushback. I've been kind of watching for that. And I think our crowd is a little different than the one at Costco, maybe. So we can't require masks forever, but for now, I think we're going to continue to. I think that's about it for me.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate that overview. And I'm going to introduce LaTonnsya. Burney, LaTonnsya, will you introduce yourself and share a little bit about why you're here today?
Hi, everyone. My name is LaTonnsya Burney. I am the VLPA manager with the Arts and Business Council of Greater Nashville. I'm glad you kind of transitioned that question, because I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to say. I came on with VLPA and ABC after all of the madness, I guess. So I was like, I don't know when the dates were, when shutdown officially was, but I will say I'm just here to speak a little bit about some of the legal questions that you may have. I am an attorney, work with VOPA. I'm not your attorney. So all of the it depends will come out. It's just guidance about what's going on. I think something that we've probably all said more in the last year or so than ever is unprecedented and pivot. And I think you all have all been masters of that and will continue to be. And so I'm just here to kind of give some guidance on how to continue to navigate and pivot with all of the uncertainty that we get every day with do we wear masks? Do we not wear masks? Do we require people to wear masks? And those questions that'll continue to come up, and just be here as another resource, and looking forward to having a discussion with you all.
Thanks, LaTonnsya. And I have some statistics, and I wonder if these statistics would even change because of Thursday's announcement. But the National Association of State Arts Agencies, they did some surveys and found that what makes people feel safe, 79% said mandatory mask coverings make people feel safe. 77% said vaccine availability makes people feel safe. The ability to be outdoors instead of indoors. Seeing others visit a place makes them feel like they can visit that place. So places being open, that sort of thing. And then the majority of people who attend cultural organization events want to wear masks. Your audiences want to wear masks. That's what they found. And then attendance is projected to recover to 2019 levels by 2023. So when we think about in terms of attendance and attendance levels, they're predicting that we're still a long ways out from 100% of what we saw prior to the pandemic. And they said exhibit-based, 72.2% recovered by the end of 2021, 98.8% recovered by the end of 2022. And then for performance-based organizations, only 58% recovered by the end of 2021, 92.3% recovered by the end of year 2022. Yes, James, I will definitely I will share links to a lot of the things that we referenced, including that after in an email with the recording of the video. But I say all of that to say, these statistics were something we were looking at when we were thinking about framing this conversation. And then of course, Thursday happened and the CDC made their announcement. So I kind of want to see everybody, I know David mentioned it, but Stephanie, is anything changing since that announcement for you? How's that impacting the Belcourt?
Not yet. We immediately came out with a statement that said, hey, give us a minute, right? We need time to digest. We need to think it through. And so we're also kind of waiting on additional guidance. There's a field-wide organization for movie theaters, both commercial and independents, that is actually meeting with the CDC today. And they have a program that we're a part of called Cinema Safe. And they, were very clear. They are not changing any of the Cinema Safe policies, which do include masking yet. But, we'll see, by the end of the week, I imagine they'll have some sort of refreshed recommendations, whether we go along with all of their recommendations or we keep some masking rules in place, I think is a thing that we're sort of working through. But even, much like the data you just shared, there was just some new moviegoer data that came out today. Again, it's very broad. It's from commercials to independents, but the numbers were the same, right? That 41% of people really still preferred some amount of masking or total masking. That making it completely voluntary does not seem to appeal to people or make them feel particularly safe. So I don't see us abandoning it in the near term, especially, but we'll keep watching numbers, right, and cases and see what happens as we move through the summer. But
excuse me, Stephanie, you made me think that as I think about the last year, we've had to figure this stuff out all along, and now is no different. Nobody was ever really telling us what to do. We kind of knew, and my gut tells me that we're okay just keeping that mask requirement in place, and that our patrons appreciate it. They feel protected. Maybe it is just theater. My suspicion is that people you see wearing a mask are fully vaccinated, and vice versa. But that's okay. At least we know who's going to be okay when the next big outbreak. But since Thursday, I've started to feel more and more confident that we need to do what we need to do, and we kind of know what that is, and I feel like our audiences will support that.
Yeah, we had over the weekend, we really didn't see pushback from patrons. They were happy to wear their masks. I mean, a couple of people came in and showed their vaccine cards, and our staff was like, great, us too, but we still need masks. And, there's always an outlier or two. There's a guy who walks to the door regularly, our glass doors, and our front of house team says, put on your mask. And he says, I won't. And he walks away. It's like this performance art that happens outside the Belcourt occasionally, but that those are the outlier cases. People really have been comfortable with all the steps we've taken because they feel cared for.
Marcellus, has that announcement on Thursday impacted you? And I know what's unique about your organization is you have both the performance side of things, but also the education side of things, and you have to treat those a little bit differently. Has that impacted the way you're thinking about that at all?
I'm not going to say that it's had any impact is an interesting word. So listening to the head of the CDC, her remarks, one of the things that was interesting that she said was that, you know, while that's their recommendation, they're still leaving it to local jurisdictions to kind of, you know, to make their own call, because, you know, vaccination rates are different and in different parts of the country, you know, positivity rates are different. So there's something universal about the virus as far as like, you know, it's the country. So I think similarly, I think every organization has to kind of look at their community and kind of and make best decisions for their community. So, you know, for example, the majority of our community is African American, and so we've seen, you know, obviously over the course of the year, where our community has been disproportionately impacted by this virus. So it's important that we remain vigilant, because we have seen this virus really devastate, you know, our community. We also work with children, heavily with children who, you know, if you're under 12, you still can't get vaccinated. So I'm working with
children are the wild card in all this, and
Right.
I don't quite know how you sort of square that. If you're not going to wear a mask, how you get around that.
Exactly. So, you know, being that so much of my population are under 12, you know, removing masks to me doesn't seem feasible yet. People are still getting COVID. So while it makes me feel better that, like, if I'm going to meet with the company and everyone's vaccinated, that we can take off masks. We haven't done that in a year. So there may be some flexibility there, that, you know, masks are going to still be a very important part of our ability to be open and to be safe. So, you know, I don't see anything changing until, you know, at least 70% of my community is vaccinated, which we're not at that number yet. So masks are going to be part of what we do going forward for a while. Not to mention that I've been, you know, so I work with kids a lot. And typically by this time I would have had at least 3 or 4 cold or flu situations. It's just part of life. I have not been sick once since March with anything that's like, you know, so just actual proof for me that the mask does do something in terms of, you know, keeping viruses and bad things at bay. So for now, I think that it'll still be part of our plan.
Well, and you bring up a great point, Marcellus. I'm curious, because you mentioned masks a lot, and we've talked a lot about masks, but I'm curious in terms of other precautions that you've taken, and are there other precautions that you might be changing, whether it's, if you're not changing a mask policy, and really maybe how's your organization making those decisions? Because we have a lot of organizational leaders on this call. So what is the process you've got in place to really make those decisions?
So again, it's one of the things that we do that's been very, I think, important is assurance testing. So we're doing healthcare here. And so we've invested a lot of resources into assurance testing. So for example, the students are getting ready for their end of the year presentation. We'll be filming at the Cannon Center, which is a theater here in Memphis. And so I really want the kids to perform without masks, to be able to record the performances without a mask on stage. And so for me to do that, I really had to get, you know, parent buy-in and figure out what additional protocols we needed to take to make that possible. And so what we're going to do is test all of the kids, you know, and we've done this through all of our productions. So we've, you know, the productions I talked about earlier that aired on WREG, none of the productions do you see the dancers with masks, which is different. If you're watching a lot of the virtual stuff that's coming out in New York and Chicago, big time companies, the dancers have masks on. And to me, I just don't think that the emotional resonance of seeing someone dance with a mask is the same as without one. And not to say that that should trump, you know, safety, But if we can be safe and get the mask off for performance for a short period of time, then I think it's worth pursuing. And so we've used a lot of, as I said, assurance testing to do that. And so we get the results pretty quickly, within 12 to 24 hours. And then it gives us peace of mind that, for the 10 minutes, 15 minutes that we're on stage, as long as I'm keeping the dancers relatively distant, that we can do that safely. We also, again, are looking at, again, the community. So I have kids that are in class that, maybe are older students, the professional company, I've been pushing them to get vaccinated. So next year, assuming that all of our dancers are vaccinated, we won't require them to wear masks. Older dancers, we may not require that, but for our 7 to 9-year-olds, that probably still will be a requirement. For teachers that are working with students, that probably still will be a requirement.
Ellen, I see your question. We're going to cover that in just a moment. And then Bonnie had a good question. Marcellus, I think this is a good time to ask this. How is the logistics of testing every performer possible? Do you pay for it? What's that look like?
So we do 2 types of testing. We do, individual swab test. And so that's a little more expensive. I think we pay about $20 per test. And the benefit of that is that you get the result, each swab, you get an individual result. We also do pod testing, which is where we can group, I think, up to 20 dancers into a pod. And so the pod, maybe it's 200 for the pod, but if you have 20, the cost per person is $10. The downside to the pod is that if everyone's negative, if everyone's negative in the pod, then everyone gets a negative result. If there's someone who's positive in the pod, then everyone in the pod has to then be tested again, with an individual swab. So it just takes a little bit more time. For me, it raises anxiety for the group a little bit. That so we tend to lean to the individual swab test. But again, it does incur that $20 per test result, and we've spent a good amount of money. But the peace of mind and our ability to push forward, I think the value, the return on that investment has been tenfold.
Thanks, Marcellus. David, how is the Knoxville Museum of Art handling the process of making these decisions? What does that look like within the museum?
Early on, when we had to act quickly and without much information, I delegated. I created a small group of trustees who are my COVID committee, so I could do a quick email to 5 or 6 people. Say, I think we're going to do this. What do you think? Soon after that, I assigned 2 staff members, the ones basically who were responsible for the frontline staff, to be my COVID kind of marshals, and I run everything through them. And if somebody wants to have some sort of event, they have to kind of they have to run everything through these 2 staff members who are really up to speed on CDC recommendations and they really dig into the details of these long attachments, and they've been a great resource. I found over the last year or so that I'm drowning in COVID information, and from arts organizations, from everywhere, and it's been really helpful to have somebody that I could really kind of outsource some of the careful study of that. So I feel like we have kind of a gatekeeper to make sure that we're not getting too far ahead of ourselves.
Thanks, David. And Stephanie, how is the Belcourt handling that process?
We've been doing it pretty collaboratively, actually. We've had weekly staff meeting calls through this whole thing via Zoom that have been opened actually to everyone who was working for the Belcourt when we closed and who we kept paying even while we were closed. But it's really been essential to get feedback, especially from our front of house team and the front of house management team, to really get a good gut on how we keep taking care of both staff and patrons. So, you know, it's really been me along with those folks who have been making those decisions. The board has been great in terms of providing, in particular, our finance committee, sort of in caring about watching the money and helping and making sure our cash management through this kind of crazy moment was okay. But in terms of making decisions about what we do from a facility standpoint, they've really given us the flexibility, you know, to just make those decisions independent of them and keep them informed. So it's been a pretty smooth process, and I think it's actually brought us closer together as a team of colleagues. And maybe like there's sort of broader stakeholder investment in decision making, so it doesn't just feel like it's me, but that it is really a community process.
And I would add too, Jonathan, that as these decisions were fairly simple when everybody knew what the rules were. And I think for the next few months, it's going to be a lot more complicated, especially as any kind of outside groups use your facility. To what degree can you control what they do, and what's your obligation to make sure that we're not quite sure how that's going to work. And I'm kind of dreading the next few months for that reason.
Well, that's a good segue, I think, into asking LaTonnsya to help us a little bit with some of these legal questions. Ellen Gilbert asked in the chat, how are people handling staff and teaching artists who do not want to get vaccinated? And so I think that really leads us into these questions about who can you require to be vaccinated, who can you not require to be vaccinated? So LaTonnsya, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I imagine some of them it's going to be it depends, but I guess the first question is, can an organization require staff or contractors, teaching artists to be vaccinated?
Well, the answer is always it depends. First of all, it's always it depends. But the EEOC has provided really good guidelines on employers and businesses on whether or not you can require vaccinations for your staff members. And generally, the rule is yes. You can require employees to be vaccinated. The question is whether or not you want to do that, I think is, and it's really case by case for the organization, the entity, in terms of risk management. I think the legal side of it is always managing the risks of your business. One very important thing to consider is a lot of people are still uneasy about being vaccinated. So if you have a high number of people that don't want to be vaccinated and you're going to require that, and your thought process is if you're not going to be vaccinated, you can't work with us, and a lot of people don't want to get it, what happens to your workforce? I would say that having a mandate is difficult too, because how you implement that for your business is hard, because there are legal implications in terms of not violating the ADA, and also making accommodations for individuals who have disabilities, as well as making accommodations for individuals who ask for accommodations for religious exceptions, as well as potential discriminatory reasons that are involved. For instance, like a disparate impact. These are big legal words that in a nutshell mean if you have very specific people that need to be vaccinated based on their job descriptions, but those people are all in one class, that could expose you to risks. And I say one class, I'm saying one protected class. So if your workforce is all your frontline workforce are all over 40, and those are the people that you are requiring to get vaccinated. But similarly situated employees somewhere else are not getting required to be vaccinated, like your exec team is not required to be vaccinated. Those are the kinds of implications that you bring up in terms of the requirement of having a vaccination. So yes, you can have employers required to be vaccinated, but I think because of so many things that you think through in terms of managing the risks for your specific business, I imagine a lot of businesses are still implementing the things to encourage vaccinations of their employers instead of the requirements because of the potential risks of what happens in the programs that you have to create and making sure your vaccination requirement is legally sound, making sure the policy you write in order to have the vaccination requirement is legally sound, making sure you take into account the accommodations necessary, that it's not discriminatory, and that you offer accommodations if people don't get vaccinated is also a part of it. And considering people don't want to get vaccinated, those are all kinds of things to think about when you determine whether or not you want to have a requirement of vaccination.
LaTonnsya, what I hear you saying is that yes, you can require your staff to be vaccinated, but boy, you probably just don't want anyone to try that. Am I too far off?
It's really, I mean, it just really depends on the number of staff you have. It depends on kind of what the feel in your building is. Is your staff likely to be vaccinated? What kind of front-facing business it is? It all depends on your business, and it depends on like the risks, the type of risk person you are. I'm risk averse, so I'm very much the type of person that would advise do what you want to do in order to protect your staff. And no one wants to be the first organization that gets sued by all of their employees because they required a vaccine because of all of the potential reasons. But there are businesses that may be in a position to make that requirement, and they are legally able to do that because
and so far the risk of getting infected has been a real motivator for all of our staff. Like I can't protect you, but you can protect yourself, and that's
right.
That's worked pretty well so far.
Right. And I think that right now where we are, from what I've read and seen, is creating an environment to educate your staff and encourage them makes them feel better than saying you're required to get it, but you are not prohibited from those type of requirements as a private business.
LaTonnsya, so employer-employee relations are one thing, but when you're thinking about audiences and that sort of thing, can arts organizations require masks indefinitely, or can they? And I think another question a lot of folks have asked is, can they require proof of vaccination for people to be able to attend their events and that sort of thing?
So I don't want to say anything is indefinite, but you can require individuals to wear masks to come into your establishment because you are a private business. And I think a lot of people were leery with this new, you don't have to wear a mask if you're vaccinated, but you are a private entity. And so just as much as you can require somebody to wear a shirt and shoes to come in your business, you can require a mask, so long as there isn't some new law that comes out that says businesses can no longer require that. And I think specifically for Tennessee, and anything could change, unprecedented and pivot. I'll just say that we are in a state where privacy of businesses and their rights are paramount. We do believe in businesses being able to pretty much handle what happens in their business. So you can require patrons to wear masks. I think still being mindful of the guidelines from the CDC before they said don't wear a mask if you're vaccinated, social distancing, allowing for people to have the space, wear the mask for concerts is still something that you're able to do as a private entity because you are a private entity. But also, I'll just continue to say, with this new release from the CDC, there's uneasiness about what that pushback is going to look like. And I think it's just a matter of the business owner really understanding who their patrons are. Just hearing from Belcourt, it seems like people still want to wear masks. People who've been vaccinated still feel comfortable with that. And so I think it's just really going to be seeing what your audience wants, but as far as what you can do as a private business, you can require individuals to wear masks. And just in terms of proof of vaccination, think about like the vaccine passports for airlines. Airlines are now saying there's certain places that are saying, I would like for you to show that you've been vaccinated. Those are things that you can do. I personally wouldn't suggest that. I think that could get very murky in terms of enforcement, right? Who's going to be at your front door asking people to show their vaccine cards, and vaccine cards in terms of that's my medical record. Like, do I want to show this to come to a concert? Those are the kinds of things that you kind of want to weigh. But in terms of you being a business and you having a private entity, those are things that you are allowed to do, but it's just really the risks of losing customers for doing that. So I think probably what I would generally advise is do things based on the business and what you think would make your patrons feel safe. But the more kind of regulations that you add, the more you have to think about what your patrons would be okay with. And so when you start getting into show me that you've been vaccinated or you have to be vaccinated in here, you also have to think about the ADA and being discriminatory on the basis of religion. Even having people wear masks, some people can just say, I'm not allowed to wear a mask. You don't want to get into the questions of, well, why can't you wear a mask? Because that also implicates the ADA. So it's really just a matter of doing what's best specifically to protect the safety of your staff and your patrons, and just balancing that with the risks of your business.
Thanks, LaTonnsya. That's very informative, and I think helps clear up a lot of the questions that folks have. But I think it also brings up a really good point, which is the different expectations from different audiences and different groups in the community. You know, we're going to have people who are going to be, they're going to still want to wear masks 3 months from now. There's going to be people that, you know, they don't feel like they should have to wear a mask to go anywhere. And people that work at those front of house people, those front of the line workers are the ones that are going to have to deal with those folks on a day-to-day basis. And I'm going to start with Stephanie Silverman, because I know the Belcourt has done a lot of work on this, but really one thing we wanted to touch on in this panel discussion is how are you training your employees on de-escalation and dealing with the different expectations? What does that look like for your organization? How are you addressing it? And Stephanie, I'll start with you.
We had actually started doing some of this work before the pandemic. You know, given the last several years and the heightened tensions just within communities about any number of topics, we were seeing a level of kind of aggression from patrons that was different than we had before, honestly. And a lot, frankly, a lot of microaggressions, especially that were felt by our BIPOC staff. So we began to do both, sort of go through a process of having sort of basically a code of conduct for everyone, right? That was both for our staff and for our patrons. It was sort of a shared agreement that were the rules of the road within the Belcourt. And within that, we did de-escalation training for our staff. And I've supplied Jonathan a handout that the woman who helped us do this training had developed for us that he'll share with everyone. But it's, you know, just very specific steps that are really part of the sort of nonviolent communication training that a lot of folks go through, you know, really just like approaching a person with a level, calm voice, being sure your body is open in terms of its body language. It's a very specific series of steps, and it did, for our staff, give them a level of comfort, like they just had some pretty basic tools. We also, you know, had a lot of conversation around boundaries, and this notion that the customer is always right, as far as I'm concerned, is no longer relevant. If staff feels attacked or endangered, that is a huge problem. And we as an institution need to be there to back them up and allow them to feel like they are in a safe space in a work environment. So we've really talked a lot about boundaries, about personal boundaries and professional boundaries. And, I'm sure we're not the only arts organization that has pretty close relationships with our patrons. We have people who come here every day. Well, we used to when we were open all the time. They're coming back. But, there's just a level of sort of confidence that particularly the front of house team needed to be able to calm situations and to be able to sort of put up their own boundaries and say, this is beyond what this institution allows, and here are the rules, and also here's my boss's email if you want to be mad at someone about it. So those strategies have been good for us, and especially as we've sort of walked into this new moment where it's a different, in some ways it is so much about the stupid masking, but the masking is a lot about politics and belief and all these other things that are deeply layered with it. And just having these policies in place has been really helpful as we've been navigating this.
Thank you, Stephanie. And yes, I will definitely, after this webinar, we'll share the recording once that's available and all of the resources that we've mentioned, including that handout on de-escalation. Marcellus, how did these issues, I know you talk a lot about, you work in a very specific community that has a very specific set of needs. Are these issues of de-escalation, are you seeing that being relevant, or is it a different set of issues for your organization?
I'm not seeing those issues being relevant, particularly, as I said, the majority of our immediate audience is African American, and we definitely see, particularly in our community, that we're not ready to take off the mask. So so that's not really one of the challenges we are having, and I think what this pandemic has taught us, or reaffirmed for us, is how important it is to know your community, and to really have those conversations with your community. So our reopening plan, it was titled, the power of one, and so it's this idea that, what we do as individuals impacts the community. And so, although Collage can do everything, we can do all the things, but what's really going to keep our community safe are the choices and behaviors and decisions that, our participants do outside of the studio, that they do outside of the building. And so what are we willing to sacrifice? What are we willing to do? What are the things that we're willing to do to make the experience of the art for their kids, to make the experience of the art, for the broader community, to make that possible. And so we've been having those conversations, very frank and open conversations from the very beginning. And again, really understanding our community, knowing that, what we do isn't for everyone in Memphis. It's not for everyone in Tennessee. We have a very specific community. And this is a time, I think, for all of our organizations to really kind of focus on who those people are, and really having those conversations with them. As someone put in the chat, if the expectations are clear on the front end, I think that there's very little work that needs to happen on the back end in terms of de-escalation, because we've all bought in to our shared values.
Thank you, Marcellus. And absolutely, I noticed when Stephanie was talking earlier about the changes that came out last week, they immediately made an announcement. Hey, we know this happened. Please give us some time communicating with their audience and their community. And those open lines of communication seem to be really important. David, I'm going to change the question a little bit for you because I want to go into Q&A in a moment. But one of the things that we talked about was the shared trauma of the past year and how that's impacted employees. And that's another community that all organizations are serving. Stephanie touched on it when she was talking about de-escalation and microaggressions and keeping employees safe and having a sort of social contract with your audience. How are you and how is the museum considering the impact of the last year on your staff and how you're sort of approaching that moving forward?
Yeah, two things. One, and probably a lot of you are doing this. One's very specific and one's more general. The specific one is that we're using PPP money to bonus everyone. The frontline staff, everybody else, they all were in there 1,000%, and that it's nice to get some extra cash sometime. And we're able to do that because with the PPP infusion. The other one is to just give everybody more space, give your staff more space, give your stakeholders more space. Understand that you might not be the number one preoccupation of that donor or even that staff person. Maybe their job is not their number one priority at the moment. There's so much going on, and just kind of give people the grace and the space to let them deal with all the things that are going on, especially because we've had to deal with these things more or less individually or in pairs. There's no water cooler processing the way we're used to dealing with things, and I think that has amplified the trauma of so many things that have happened this year. But I think that we probably have pulled back on our communication to some degree and not bombarded our stakeholders with reminders of what a terrible year it is, and these uncertain times, and blah blah blah. And one of my big takeaways is that it's okay to let up some, and you'll be fine. And maybe everyone's not dying for that 10th email from your organization. That's the making space for everybody part. And I hope I can kind of hold on to that going forward.
Thank you, David. And we've got about 15 minutes left. This webinar goes to 4:15. So I really want to go ahead and open it up for questions from the audience. And well, I'll kind of put the questions out and let anybody respond that wants to. And while we're waiting on questions to come in from the chat, I just want to ask, anybody can kind of take this question, but this will be sort of the first one. How are you taking care of yourself as a leader through all of this last year and into the future? Does anybody have any tips for how you've handled this yourself? Nope.
Nobody's going to say box wine.
Yeah. No, does bourbon count?
Okay.
I think it's still hard. I think maybe the recovery caretaking part is coming in the future, because there's just too much decision making that's happening on the regular. That, I mean, as best demonstrated by the CDC announcement, right? Like, you get in a groove and then something comes up and you have to be, back in this collaborative decision making mode. And so that just hasn't really let up this year. So
it's if you're old enough to remember Ally McBeal, and she'd be having these elaborate daydreams, and suddenly there'd be the sound of the needle scratching across the record. And that to me is the soundtrack of 2020, 21. Just when you're thinking, okay, it's gonna be okay, and then.
So we have a question from James Lindsay in the chat. For performance venues, can't say that for some reason, what changes are being made to the normal audience seating layouts? For example, are you going to continue socially distancing? Are you going to change the layout? Stephanie, I'll go to you first with Belcourt. Are you going to change seating layouts because of the recent announcement?
Well, we are. So right now, we went through our space and really meticulously roped off, really, frankly, almost all the seats in both theaters, so that you had ensured social distancing, right? So we have the seats now in groups of 2s and 4s. We have this very complicated way of putting tickets on sale and off sale and on sale again to make sure we're never overselling, and that if a single person buys a ticket, 2 seats get knocked out because we're not going to put a stranger next to them. And it's been a good system, and it was definitely a good system in November when we tried to open, and we really, we did not have people who were vaccinated. Now that we do have people who are vaccinated, and we are keeping the mask mandate in place for now, we're about to shift to a 50% capacity. So that'll add about 30% more capacity to our room. We can take off our ropes. We're going to have people really self-select their seats, but that's a benefit of being a movie theater, right? That we don't have assigned seating. So that gives us a level of flexibility that makes that a little bit easier than someone who's selling a ticketed concert ticket. So it's going to be a slow process, I think, to walk back to anything that looks like a normal capacity. But so we're doing away with our strict 6-foot which is literally where we measured and roped off seats. We are gonna, leave enough empty seats so that people should be able to find a space that's largely distant. But I would say we are looking more probably at a 3-foot distance, which is also based on the moviegoer research that we're looking at, a comfortable distance for most people at this point. So yeah, we are kind of doing away with a guaranteed 6-foot distance situation.
Marcellus, I know you had scheduled your calendar to be virtual, but how are you thinking about having audiences in the future?
We are, so our approach is going to be starting in the fall. We will start doing some outdoor performances and maybe smaller intimate performances with our community. So going back to like, now is the time to involve people that we know, right? And so, and then in 2022, assuming that in the fall, much of the performing arts industry will start getting back to some level of in-person live performances, that we'll be able to let our colleagues kind of, do the first round and then hopefully learn learn from them. And then in 2022, I think is when we will start to do live performances in the spirit of what our live performances look like pre-COVID. So we're just going to take some time and do some smaller things, test it out again with community, and then look to 2022 when hopefully we have a larger portion of the community vaccinated, that we have more data and science to kind of, it's just like every day there's a new report and new findings. And so it's, I think unfortunately, time is really going to, be our best teacher in this. So that's going to be our approach. So we're excited about performing again. And as I said, hope to do that in 2022.
Thank you. I don't see any new questions in the chat, but one question that I do want to ask, and then we'll go into final thoughts, but we were talking about the shared trauma of the last year and how it impacts employees, audiences, communities. But I'm curious, how is it impacting your programs? Are you going to try to address this shared trauma through the programs that you're offering to the community in any way in the next year? Is that something you're thinking about now? Is it something that's too big to think about in sort of the day-to-day changes and that sort of thing? But I'll start with David, and then we can just go around. I'm curious if anybody has is thinking about that as an organization.
I have this theory, and we'll see in a few years if I'm right, that that COVID will be forgotten completely in a few years. It's so unpleasant, it will just kind of disappear. What will stick from 2020 is the kind of national equity movement that came into being after George Floyd's death. And that will be the thing that we will look back at, that as the beginning point of all kind of important things. COVID will just be an annoyance. And if you think about that, if you ever heard from your grandparents or great grandparents' story of the great 1918 flu epidemic, no, people just put it away. And I think that the thing that mattered in 2020 was George Floyd, not COVID. We'll see if that turns out to be right or not.
Anybody else want to take that question?
Well, my hope is that one of the reactions that we all have to the parts of this year that have been very traumatic, both around racial equity questions and around the aloneness of the COVID moment, is that we are gathering together more and having real conversations. I am really pretty excited about the work that maybe has been created during this moment by artists who've been trapped at home and have been, sort of creating well during this moment. And certainly in the world of filmmaking, I think we may see some pretty extraordinary storytelling coming out that was created during this moment and that will be made going forward. But I just am really hopeful that the isolation of this year means that we value humanity and togetherness in a more profound way, and that we look forward to having shared experiences. Given that all of us are in the shared experience work world, I hope there's a bit of a renaissance around the love and recognition of that, of how important those shared moments are.
Yeah, and I should clarify, I think COVID will change, it will change us personally, it will change us institutionally, but I just don't think we'll talk about it in a very direct way.
Marcellus, would you like to add anything?
I would say that for, so most of us are, we're involved in the arts. I mean, we're involved in the classical arts, which is so heavily rooted in tradition. And so, change has been very hard, in classical ballet. And so I think that the pandemic and there's 3 pandemics. We have an economic pandemic, a racial pandemic, a health pandemic, that these pandemics have really forced change. And at least forced us to do things differently. So I think from a philosophical standpoint, as we think about, change in terms of, equity, diversity, and inclusion, but then also change from a business model, being that, maybe we can do things differently. I know we've done it this way for, 200 years, but is that really working for us? Is it really serving our communities in the best way? And so I think that this period for many of us has forced us to think out of the box, has forced us to do things differently. And I hope that what we take from this moment as we move forward is the ability to lean into that more and not to be afraid of leaning into that, because we've proven that we can do things differently, and that it's not that the world's not going to crumble in terms of our art forms. And so just leaning into that more, because I think for many of our industries to be sustainable, that we have to really do things differently. And even as we talk about self-care and, none of us could offer anything that would be valuable to this group. And I definitely can offer nothing valuable, but that's something that came out of this. It's is this sustainable in terms of the work that we do and how hard we have to work with such limited resources and the burnout that our staffs feel and the burnout that we feel, and how do we fix that? And so I think it's if anything, again, turning that poison into medicine, really taking this opportunity to look about how we build, as people have said already, a normal that's healthier and more sustainable.
Thank you so much. LaTonnsya, would you like to give a final thought on any advice or resources people can get to help them navigate all the legal questions they may have around the pandemic?
Sure. I'd just like to say one thing, that just piggybacking off of what Marcellus said, the legal profession is one of the oldest, most traditional professions ever. And one thing that I've learned in being a lawyer is we don't reinvent the wheel. And so in terms of all of you all being here, one thing I just suggest, and one thing that we've learned from the pandemic, is to lean on one another and really use each other for support to figure out, what the next move is going to be, because there are a lot of things that you're able to do. But just to know kind of, hey, what are you guys doing? What's the industry doing? Because you don't want to be the first one to jump out there into the water without the support of everyone else. Because I think if you have the support of everyone else and the wave of everyone else, that just makes your transition, your pivot a little stronger. But like I said, the EEOC is out there. The VLPA is here. If you need us, we can connect you with some volunteer attorneys to just kind of guide you, because it is really managing the risks that you have for your specific business, and knowing your customer, and nobody knows your customer better than you, and knowing kind of what you're looking at in terms of what your business does. But ultimately, it's just leaning into the industry that you're in and just knowing what the decision for you all, what's the best decision for you. So I would just say do that.
Thank you, LaTonnsya. And we are almost at time. So I want to be very cognizant. Everyone, thank you so much. All of our panelists, Stephanie, Marcellus, David, LaTonnsya, thank you all so much for being here and for sharing your wisdom and experience today. We really appreciate it. Thank you again to the Tennessee Arts Commission for sponsoring this series. It's been a pleasure to be able to go through the last year and to come together with a group from throughout the entire state of Tennessee on a regular basis and think about how we're all handling what we're going through. So that's been a pleasure for me moderating these. I will definitely send out a recording of this webinar. I'll send some resources that were mentioned in the conversation. I'll send some links that weren't mentioned, but might be great resources for everyone. So be on the lookout for those. And if you need assistance, I will throw our website up in the email. We run the Volunteer Lawyers and Professionals for the Arts. LaTonnsya masterfully manages that program. And so if you do have questions, you can reach out to the Arts and Business Council. But that's all that we have for today. Y'all have a wonderful rest of your week, and hopefully there's no new announcements tomorrow. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.